How did a dedicated elementary school teacher transform herself into a nationally known, award-winning contemporary mixed media artist? I'm Grace Trafton of The Better Part. Stay tuned and find out.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program that encompasses a diverse spectrum of topics important to our community, which we hope will both inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy the program.
Flo Wong was born and raised in Oakland, California's Chinatown, and received a degree in English from UC Berkeley. After successfully teaching school for a number of years, she began her career as an artist at the age of 40. Flo is the co-founder of the Asian American Women Artists Association in San Francisco and has exhibited widely in regional, national, and international bases. Some of her many venues include the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco, both the Angel Island and Ellis Island immigration stations, and abroad in China, Denmark, and Japan. Flo has been featured on KQED's program Spark and the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. She has received 2 National Endowment for the Arts Awards and has also won other awards, including the City of Sunnyvale's Outstanding Contribution to the Arts Award in 2007. Welcome, Flo. So tell us, how did you transform yourself from a successful school teacher to an award-winning artist? And what motivated you to make this dramatic change in your career path?
Thank you for inviting me on the program, Grace. I'm happy to be here. It began when I was in my late 30s, and I was happily married and still am. I was and still am the mother of 2 wonderful children. And I asked myself what was going to be there for me, because my husband at that time, who was working, was dedicated to his job. My children had their own paths on which they were walking, and I realized that one day I would be an empty nester. And I know that the concept of empty nester involves both a mother and a father, a husband and wife. But in my case, I took that thought and examined it. And it was at that point I realized that I wanted to know what was my voice beyond that of being a wife and a mother. And so I took myself then to De Anza College and to Foothill College and began to take art lessons and art classes. And that is because before I did that, I went to museums and galleries. And when I went there to see the shows, I was at home. They were my temples, they were my places of spirit and spiritual development.
I think many of us have faced that same question in midlife. So you've been using your art to tell stories, whether it's about the Chinese immigration experience or personal stories of your family through visual narratives. Let's start with the doll. What's behind the story of the doll?
This doll is inspired by a set of dolls that I had made earlier called the cocooning dolls. And I started the cocooning dolls because I was influenced by David Lynch, who is a filmmaker and also a painter. And I heard him interviewed on a PBS program one day, and he said that if we sat and were quiet every day for 30 to 45 minutes, all of the creative ideas would surface. And so I was very intrigued because I had already been practicing meditation. And so when I decided to do the cocooning dolls, I went to the studio and I meditated before I made each doll for 30 to 45 minutes. Then whatever happened was going to happen. So then fast forward to this doll, which is from my Abundance series. And this is called Kim Nui Ho Miang Sui. And the Chinese that I am using is the Huaishan dialect from the south of China. It is the dialect that my parents brought with them when they emigrated from China. And so Kim Nui means golden female, golden girl. The traditional way of calling a valued or precious child in a family is Kim Doi, which means male. So I decided that I would honor myself because I was born the sixth unwanted daughter of our family. And this doll happens to have two sides. It's the only doll that has a front and a back. And the back is I made in black and blue. And if you look closely on the face, the doll has a frown. And that represents the time that I discovered that I was born the sixth unwanted daughter in our family. However, my mother had always told me that I had Ho Myung Sui, which literally translated means good life's water, good karma. And it is true. At this time of my life, I am blessed. And so I wanted to talk about my transformation from being an unwanted daughter to a woman who is blessed, a woman who has a voice, a woman who is able to share through the making of art. And if you look closely at the face, I have designed the ideogram of female, Nui. And so I wanted to openly declare my place in being a female.
That's a very, very rich story behind that doll. And you know, when you told me that you were also bringing a pie, I had envisioned something entirely different. Tell us about the pie over here.
Yes, this pie is part of the Omaha Pie Project, which I will take to Council Bluffs, Iowa for a show in March of 2012. I wanted to use a vehicle that would appeal to audiences in the Midwest. And in the Midwest, as in all of the United States, the universal food at any restaurant, diner, cafe are pies. And so, or the universal food is a pie. And I then looked for very interesting, quirky people in Omaha to tell their stories. So my objects are vehicles to tell the interesting stories of ordinary people. This pie is called Big Mama. It is named in honor of Patricia Barron, an African-American woman who at the age of 66 went to the banks for a loan. She wanted to start a restaurant. The banks turned her down. Today, she is the owner of 2 Big Mama's restaurants, and she has been featured on Guy Fieri's Food Network program. There is a doll inside of the pie, and that represents Big Mama herself. And she sent me, along with the pie tin and some fabric, her late daughter's first grade art project. And she wrote a note to explain that her daughter had died and what happened. And so I was taken by the fact that she had sent me something so personal. And I decided that then I would use the daughter's first grade art project to begin the making of the pie. And the pie crust is quite amazing. It's made by my studio assistant, Teresa Because. And I told her that I wanted a lattice top, and I wanted to be for people to be able to see through, to see the contents of the pie. When she finished wrapping the wire in a circular form, there was leftover wire, and she was going to cut it. I said, no, don't cut it, because those extra tendrils, those lyrical curlicues represent Big Mama's spirit.
That's an amazing story. So tell us now about the drawing.
The drawing, this is from my Oakland Chinatown series, which I drew with one pencil because I wanted to see if I could make value, meaning dark, medium, and light, from one pencil. And this is a drawing of my brother-in-law Henry at our Oakland Chinatown restaurant, which we owned from 1943 to 1961. And so Henry is standing at the counter, and there are 2 customers sitting and eating at the counter. I just wanted to talk about us as people who were working class, who worked 17 hours a day, who used our food to fill the hearts and souls of the people in Chinatown. And what's so interesting is that the man at the front of the counter is my brother-in-law Henry, and the man way in the back towards the kitchen ended up marrying my husband's sister.
Oh, my
So I
goodness.
have 2 brother-in-laws in this drawing.
Wonderful. Since some of your artwork is quite large, you've also brought some slides for us to view. The first two slides we're going to see are of a piece that's nearly 50 foot in length, and it's called Baby Jack Rice Story. Who is Baby Jack?
Baby Jack is my husband, Edward K. Wong. When he was little and he was growing up in Augusta, Georgia during segregation, my mother-in-law called him Bibi Jai. And because he lived in the African-American neighborhood of Augusta, Georgia, his friends then changed and wrapped his name to Baby Jack. And so for the longest time, Ed was never called Ed. He was always called Baby Jack. This is an installation that captures his childhood memories of growing up during segregation in Augusta, Georgia. In Augusta, Georgia, the Chinese were declared honorary whites. So they went to school with the whites, but they had to live and work with the blacks. And in specificity, Baby Jack talks about two families, the Wong family, Ed's family. His father owned the Wong Choi grocery store, and the Cade family. And Reverend Cade was a minister that had come to Augusta to preach the word of the gospel. And they were neighbors. And so they ended up becoming friends when they weren't supposed to be friends. And the Baby Jack Rice story is a male-focused story because the African Americans in the neighborhood who lived in small shotgun houses had no place for recreation. So they came to the front of the Wong Choi grocery store to play checkers, to josh with one another, to listen to the itinerant preachers, to eat watermelon, and to have their sense of community and conviviality. And so it was in this atmosphere that Ed met his best friends, the late Boykin and Cush Cade. Now, Boykin was 7 years older than Ed, and so he became the ringleader. And he led Ed and his brother Larry and Cush Cade into all kinds of mischief. But during segregation, the whites were not supposed to be with blacks. The blacks were not supposed to play with the Chinese and the whites, and the Chinese were not supposed to play with the blacks and whites. But these boys just ignored what was legislated into their lives, and they became best friends. So it was such a different kind of an upbringing than I had in the insularity of Oakland, Chinatown.
Yeah, I could imagine. The Deep South. It's someplace completely different.
Oh, it really is. Very rural. You know, the Chinese had grocery stores in Augusta, Georgia, and at one time there were 88 Chinese grocery stores located a half block from one another.
Amazing.
They brought with them the pattern of establishing their homes inside of the grocery stores. So they would find a structure divided in half. The back half were their homes, and the front half was their business, which was grocery stores. They had an economic relationship with the blacks because quite often the African Americans were not able to go out to the white grocery stores to cash their check or to buy food there because they didn't have cars. So they would go to the neighborhood grocery store, usually run by Chinese. There were one or two owned by Jewish people and also people from Germany or of German descent. And so Ed's family developed a relationship with their customers. So in order to have security in their store, they always had 2 to 3 African American men sitting by the Coke machine. That meant that no harm would come to them because people of the neighborhood were there.
Another interesting aspect of your work is about immigration and migration. The next pictures, made in the USA, are about the immigrant experience. Tell us about that.
Made in USA was an installation that I showed at the Angel Island Immigration Station and the Ellis Island Immigration Museum. And it was in 1998 that I approached Kearney Street Workshop, a San Francisco-based arts organization under the leadership of Nancy Ham. I told her that I wanted to tell the stories of immigrants from China who from 1910 to 1940 came to this country under false identity. Why the false identity? It was necessitated because of the 1882 Chinese exclusion law, which stated that Chinese laborers, their wives, and their children could not come to this country. It was a labor issue. the establishment in the U.S. was afraid that the Chinese would take jobs away from the God-fearing white Americans. But the Chinese came, and when they came, they were excused from the interrogation if they were merchants, if they were students, or if they were business people. But if they were laborers, they could not come. However, they developed a subterfuge. They bought false immigration papers from slot merchants to come to this country. And usually a Chinese father in the U.S. would buy a paper for a son. He would pay $100 per year. Say, for instance, if somebody had papers for a 14-year-old boy, that father would pay $1,400. Now, let's say that he bought papers for a 14-year-old boy, but his actual son in China waiting to come here was 17 years old. So that meant that his son in China at the age of 17 had to give up all of his personal history, adopt the history of his paper family, and be prepared to answer the questions at Angel Island. Then the purpose of the interrogation was to see if their answers matched the answers of the sponsoring family, which was usually a false paper family. Now, I have a personal interest in this because my mother was my father's paper sister. And one of the images that your viewers are seeing right now is the flag of my sister Lai King. She did not have to have an altered identity. She was allowed to keep her identity as the offspring of my father, but she could not claim my mother as her mother. Because my mother was my father's paper sister, Lai King had to identify my mother as her aunt. And so there are many, many families that have this history.
See, that's really interesting history. I don't think too many people know about that.
It is now becoming a little more known thanks to Judy Young and Himmark Lai, the Seminole historians who did the research and began to present them in books and other findings. And it is known now because the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, which is a nonprofit, is educating the people. But in my research, when I went to look for information, I looked in historical books. One book about immigration and migration had 1/4 of a sentence devoted to the Angel Island immigration story. And there were other immigration stations established in the U.S. There was one in Hawaii, Chicago, Los Angeles, the major cities. And when the Chinese could not come to the U.S. through New York or San Francisco or the stations that I just mentioned, they went to Canada.
Oh, is that right?
And then they snuck into the U.S. And when they came into the U.S., there were what we call safe houses where they hid until it was safe for them to come in.
I see. Now, the next images are titled The Dinner Table. What was the inspiration behind this?
Judy Chicago. Judy Chicago was an artist, well, she's still alive, so is an artist who made a dinner party. And so I went to see that installation in San Francisco at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art 3 times. I was so taken with it. I made my children who were young at that time go with me each time. They were bored, but I was entranced. And so Judy Chicago installed her wonderful hand-sewn embroidered piece with work from other artists contributing to the piece in a triangle. And I love that symbolism of the triangle. And so I was there, and as I walked around the triangle, I was just taken with all the famous people, women who were eating at the table. But there were no Asian American women. That did not make me happy. I got very angry. And I wondered why we, especially the Chinese Americans who have a history of being here in the U.S. for 150 years, why were we not recognized? Why we were not being seen as Americans? And so in 2004, when I went to Art Omai, a residency in New York, I decided that I would make a dinner table in honor of my family. And so the dinner table that you see on screen represents the 7 siblings and my 2 parents. Those who have died are honored with black chopsticks sticking up in the rice.
I see.
Those who are still living have the larger red bowls and they have the red chopsticks. And the center of the tablecloth that I made, and the tablecloth is made up of 5 25-pound rice sacks.
Oh.
And the runner in beads tells the lament of my mother when my father was shot, near fatally shot, in 1940 when I was a child.
Now you honored your family with the dinner table, and with the next images, you're honoring one of your sisters, Lai Hong, who is developmentally disabled. Your other sisters and one brother are accomplished and prominent. So how did Lai Hong's disability affect the family structure?
The piece is called My Sister Lai Hong, and I decided that at the age of 70, when I was going to have a birthday exhibition at the Community School of Music and Art in Mountain View, I would make a piece it was time for me to tell her story. And so I was very nervous and scared, and I called my brother-in-law Henry, her husband, and I said, Henry, I'm going to make a piece about Lai Hong. And I could hear his smile on the phone as he responded to me. He says, good, good. He says, you talk to my children and grandchildren. And I knew that I wanted to give her a personification in the shape of a mannequin. So I bought the mannequin, and I started out with 2 50-pound rice sacks that were embellished with potato chips, tortilla chips, taco chips, because Lai Hong as a child, and even as an adult, liked to eat junk food. She loved what we call flap hao. And so Ed's family members saved bags and bags and bags of chips for me to use. And then I asked my nieces, Julie, Vicky, and my nephew Mel to come to the studio to help. And it was the most amazing experience to have the 3 of them come in, because when Julie came and told me the stories, then I would immediately put that into the piece. And Lai Hong was amazing in that she was like an idiot savant because she could sing Chinese opera.
Now, another very personal story is represented by the next pictures called The Eye of the Rice. What is this about?
The Eye of the Rice, Yu Mai Ji Fan. And Yu Mai Ji Fan is Hoi San Wao, for there is raw rice to cook dinner. It is a piece that is an homage to the courage of my mother and my father. In 1940, my father was shot by a disgruntled relative in a business dispute. And there were 4 bullets in his body, or actually 3, because there was a watch that stopped the 4th bullet. And it was an act of vengeance. My father belonged to a lottery combine composed of villagers from China. And there are several stories involving the possibility of the motivation for the shooting. And one of them was that my father embezzled money because we were very poor and we had no rice to eat. I was a year and a half old, and all he had were 6 girls. And he wasn't going to die, mainly because the watch saved that 4th bullet from going into his body, but also because he and my mother had not yet given birth to a son. And so my mother, after the shooting, wearing her slippers and her apron, ran out of the house chasing the assailant,
my goodness,
saying at the top of her voice, "Kiu Meng ah, Kiu Meng ah, help, help! Catch this man, save a life, save a life."
You have an amazing mother.
She was not afraid. Here he had a gun. We don't ever know what happened to him. We may know now because my brother's doing research on a book about my father. He may uncover that. But she chased him down to several blocks away from our house. On the way, as she was shouting in her loud voice, "Kiu Meng ah, Kiu Meng ah," 2 men from a coffee shop fronting, it was really a gambling house fronting as a coffee shop, came out, and they tackled the assailant.
Oh.
But during our entire life, when our mother told the story of our father's shooting, she never mentioned the 2 men. She took the credit for capturing the assailant. And the police came. He was sentenced in court at a later time. He went to San Quentin, and he died in 1943.
Oh, I see. Now let's look at these last images called District 6, referring to a district in Cape Town, South Africa. So tell us the story behind this.
In 1997, I was the recipient of a fellowship from the Arts Council Silicon Valley in San Jose. That meant that I had money as my award. There were no strings attached. I did not have to make a piece. I did not have to give a report. All I had to do was to do something to further my art career. And because I was teaching in alternative schools at that time, and I was teaching my students about cave art and rock art, I decided that my husband and I would go to South Africa because South Africa has rock art that is still available for people to see. And so we toured South Africa and saw the rock art. But one of our side trips was a field trip to the District 6 Museum in Cape Town. The director greeted us as we sat in chairs on top of a map that filled the whole museum of the former district known as District 6. During apartheid, the authorities decided that this multicultural district that housed people of color, Jewish people, Chinese, Japanese, all other people of color, with their synagogues, with their churches, with their apartments, with their department stores, should be torn down. Because why? They wanted to create a neighborhood for whites only. And so the workers went to work. They tore down the street signs and tore down, the houses and everything else, and basically made it a huge vacant lot. Now, the worker who did this was supposed to throw everything away. Bless his heart. He saved the street names. He saved all kinds of objects from the teardown. So when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa went looking for evidence, they went to the man and he thought he was going to be arrested. He was not.
Flo, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing some of your very interesting visual narratives. I really enjoy seeing your very creative artwork. And thank you for watching. We hope you've enjoyed our program today and hope you'll tune in again next week to The Better Part. See you then.